Hey, what's up guys? This is Clint Losh, and for today's video what I'm going to be doing is going through a $3 rebuy 180 man full game review. Actually I haven't done a full game review in a little while, but I wanted to do this one because this is pretty much a continuation of the previous two videos that I've done where they were tricky hands essentially sent to me by a top 180 man reg. Well, this is that reg's same. This is that same reg, and he sent me now a full game instead of specific hands that he doctored and had questions on. So it'll again, it's a continuation from that. So it'll be interesting to see how he took some of the strategies that we talked about before, and um, and also talk about some similar strategies that I mentioned to him before, and how to utilize them using Card Runners EV, and just looking at picking up more spots. Again, in terms of this reg is, like I said, a massive winner, has over six figures in winnings. So I wanted to do this review to see, again, how other top players are playing, the spots that they're picking up, but also the spots that they can improve on. Like I said, this is a guy that is, looking to boost his ROI even more. So whenever I'm doing a review for a player like this, I mean, obviously, when we go through most of the game, there's going to be a lot of solid plays. You're not going to see any massive leaks, but it doesn't mean they don't. Players like this don't miss spots, especially if they're multi-tabling, or they can't find more spots to pick up chips, put themselves in a plus EV situation. So that's essentially what we're going to do. We're obviously going to make sure that there's no major issues, which there certainly are not, but also look at how we can play more optimally. And that's the name of the game. You want to play optimally. Sometimes you're going to play unexploitable. Sometimes you're going to play very exploitable. All depending on the players to your left. So why don't we kick it off? First thing, what I always like to do in any review, and again, like if you've seen my previous videos, is, and this goes for when you're playing, guys. Whenever you're playing, first thing you do, you get to a table, identify who the players to your left are. Are they regs? Are they randoms? What are their stats? So if we look at this, he may not have these. These guys, three guys are randoms. He may not have these stats right away, but even if you don't have the stats, especially with how many games this guy's played, over 70,000, you know who the regs are in these games. So right away you determine these three guys are not regs, playing 24-17, 35-32, and 20-4. So it's going to be tough to open up through these types of players because they're going to be flatting you a lot and potentially forcing you to play out of position. So let's get going. So that's the first thing. So my recommendation most likely is going to be probably going to have to be playing a little bit tighter for right now. And I think this is the first hand that comes up. So he opens 10 jack off from here, and he has to raise fold. And it's not that it's the worst hand in the world and he's good enough to maneuver post flop, but I'm not a huge fan of the open here purely because, again, of the players to the left. You have these three random guys playing 24-17, 35-32, and 20-4. So if there are regs to your left, maybe some random players in the blinds, then I would have no problem essentially opening in that situation. But that'd be a situation where I'd like to raise, where the regs to your left are less likely to flat you. Maybe they're going to be flatting with pocket pairs, or maybe even big aces. But they're easy to play against post flop, especially in the early game. And if you had fishy players in the blinds, well, if they call you, you have position on them with a hand that could flop well. So essentially, to open here, I would want this situation reversed. We've got tight, reggish players in the blinds, loose players directly to your left, forcing you to play out of position. So if these players were reversed, where you had the loose players in the blinds and the tight players to your left, then I would go ahead and open. So he just has to raise fold here, and we'll just flip through. I don't think there are many hands right away. Alright, so he flats here, still pretty deep versus a random player, I believe. Not as familiar with that player. And that's fine to just fold there. On that dry of a board, you could argue for potentially floating and taking away on a future street. So that's something we've talked about before. Against random players, those types of plays don't have as much value just because usually you don't have a lot of information on them. And when you don't have a lot of information on the player, you don't really want to start putting yourself in a guessing situation. If this was a reg, I'm almost never, especially if I'm flatting, I'm not going to be folding to a c-bet on this board. I can expect a c-bet 100% of the time with whatever hands they're opening up with. They don't always have to have a king to c-bet here. So if this was a reg and we decided to flat, then I would be floating, and if they check on the turn, firing the turn, and looking to take it away. So always having a game plan typically when I flat. But versus random players, it's okay to flat just quite simply with a hand that can flop well, because if you do hit, you're more likely to get a lot of value from that hand. So that's another thing. I think we're always taught in sit and goes you don't want to be calling raises, and for the most part that is true. Given in a 3 rebuy are typically deeper than normal, so you can flat when you get to this 25-50 stage or even 5100, and I'm more likely to flat versus the players that, quite simply, if I hit my hand, I'm going to be getting value from. So pretty standard up to this point. Alright, so we have ace 10. We get called by a reg, actually. The question is, do we check back or do we c-bet? Especially against a reg, if they're flatting you, a lot of times this is going to be done potentially by a pocket pair, potentially like an ace-jack, ace-queen type of hand that maybe they're just not comfortable 3-betting yet at this stage versus a middle position open from another reg. And obviously this board is extremely hard to represent, especially if you don't have a pocket pair. So if you c-bet here and he check raises you, which he certainly probably will do with a pocket pair, even could potentially do it with an ace, just simply because he doesn't believe you. Pulling off a little semi-bluff here. He doesn't believe that you're that you've got a pocket pair, and if you don't have a pocket pair, you're going to be folding out the rest of your hands. So he can make a bluff here, check raise bluff, and get you off a lot of hands. So these are flops where I actually like to check it back. Let's see what our hero here does. Makes a normal c-bet, and he gets check raise. So even versus a random player, I like to check it back and do a turn or delayed c-bet. This is a flop, like I said, that lends itself to get check raised often. So assuming you're going to be folding all non-pocket pairs, we're not going to sit here and call his check raise as essentially a bluff catcher. So I would want to check back, which can give yourself essentially 6 outs if you're behind. Or you could just take it away from most of the hands that would fold to you on the flop anyway. So I like to, again, check it back, and if he goes check check, we can fire out a small bet on the turn, whether we hit or not, and we could still get a lot of folds that way, and we can also give ourselves some outs. So usually on the boards that are hard to represent, like those really dry low boards, like if this board was 8-4 deuce, that's probably a board I would look to probably check back as well, because again, it's hard to represent, more likely to get check raised on a board like that, and we just have to give up. So I treat this pretty similarly, where we can actually give ourselves some potential outs as well. So I would check that one back. Continue. This might just be a missed spot here, maybe multi-tabling, but maybe not. In general here, I'm opening. Quite simply having an ace on the button, I'm opening. You have random players here in the blinds, so they are certainly capable of just flatting here. But again, that's perfectly fine. You're going to play in position, which is pretty much always going to be a plus EV scenario, especially with having ace high. Obviously an ace, if you hit an ace, you're probably going to have to proceed a little bit cautiously, because even if you hit an ace, that's fine. Maybe you get a street or two of value, but you're not going to go nuts having that bad of a kicker, because you could be in trouble. Or quite simply, you can have showdown value with just ace high. So, I'm pretty much opening ace X here, pocket pairs, broadways, a lot of connecting and gapper type hands, especially suited connectors. Because again, if we get called, we can play post flop with no problem in position. And if they 3-bet, okay, just raise fold, no big deal. This is an interesting hand. So, if you're playing according to your charts, with having 11 big blinds here, pre-ante, being that it's an offsuit hand, this hand is slightly outside of those shoving ranges, plus EV shoving ranges that maybe your charts are showing you. But I just wanted to give you another option. This might sound crazy. The other option is quite simply with this hand, you might not want to shove it. You can raise. I don't think it's the worst situation in the world. Usually, and again, if you see my previous videos, I like opening up. It doesn't always have to be a push-fold game. To go back to my Singo series where I do the calculations on raising through players, when to do it really wide. But here isn't really wide. We have a good hand, king queen. So I would like to, as long as obviously this the table isn't crazy, but we have these two random players here, but we got some new players at the tables. Marty, Party's a reg. We've got 11-9, 14-11, 10-9. So you got some really tight players there. So accordingly, I would go ahead and raise here. If you get called, not the greatest scenario in the world, quite simply just because you're out of position with an awkward stack, but your hand can flop really well. And you're really never going to be behind if you hit top pair, in the sense that if somebody has ace king or ace queen, they're probably going to be 3-betting you here. So you don't have to worry about that situation. So if you hit a king or a queen, you're probably going to be getting potentially lots of value from these random players if they decide to call. The other thing is, use this concept to your advantage. When guys usually raise with 10 or 11 big blinds and they don't shove, many times, especially if they don't know you, it's treated as having strength. Usually guys will just shove 10 or 11 big blinds, but if you raise, sometimes people put you on aces, kings, because you're trying to induce potentially. So a raise could, look strong here, so you have tons of fold equity, especially with these guys here. And like I said, if you get called, you have a hand that's going to flop very well. So, I wouldn't be raising too many hands here. You're close to that, just straight up push fold mode. But a hand like king queen, you're right on that borderline. I would go ahead and open. Threes is a little bit different. You don't have as much post flop value as king queen. If you don't hit your set, you're pretty much going to hate every single flop that comes. So you can't do anything here. Looks like we just added on. So you get flatted from a reg here, which is always interesting. Sometimes you don't know how wide some regs are capable of flatting. Marty's a little bit more aggressive and a looser in general. If you get a guy at 11-9 flat you might have to be concerned with aces. He could probably be doing it with some more marginal hands, king, queen, other pocket pairs. When you hit an ace here, maybe you could play the bluff catcher mode. That's another way to potentially play this. Instead of c-betting, you could probably assume he's not calling with a worse ace on this board. So could you just check call and keep in some bluffs? Yeah. It's obviously standard to kind of c-bets. He c-bets less than 50%, which is perfectly fine. So no problem there in general. If you want to get tricky versus another reg, you could check, thinking that maybe you quite simply don't have an ace, and you maybe get a street or two of him bluffing to try to take it down, and you can just check call. that way. So I kind of actually like that play versus regs. I like to mix up my play versus regs, and not always make the same play, because it can really, keep them on your toes. They're always, if you're going to see them every single day, they don't know what you have. Like, for example, in this hand, if you check, he fires out a bet to try to take it down, and you call, and then let's say you check it down from there, and he flips over king queen or something, and then you flip over an ace. That's certainly going to get that guy thinking, hey, this guy is changing up his game against me. Every time he checks to me, it doesn't always have to be a total miss. So you can really use that to your advantage in future scenarios as well. Like I said, against a reg who you're playing against every day. Against a random, they're obviously not taking notes. They're usually just clicking buttons. They're not paying attention as much. So c-betting out of position here with an ace is perfectly fine, because you can probably get value from worse aces as well, or even some second pairs, draws, stuff like that. Alright. Let's see what happened here. So against this guy, Casey Creel, he's pretty loose. He's opening 56% of his hands on the button. This last stat here, the 56, is my button raise first in. So whenever it's folded to him, he's raising, from the button over 50% of the time. That's the case. You can 3-bet pretty wide. You got an ace here as a blocker. So no problem with the 3-bet there. And again, that's a good way to start exploiting guys. Always look at these stats. Again, in terms of the stats, and I haven't gone through it in this video, even though I've done it in previous videos. If you look at my stats here, I'll pull this to the middle. We'll just use him as an example. You see the 29-28, that's VPIP pre-flop raise. 63-56, that's cutoff raise first and button raise first. So that'll tell us obviously how wide they're opening from the button or from the cutoff and from the button when it's folded to them. 0 and 89, small blind limp, small blind steal. 66 and 64. 66 is the total steal percentage. Actually, again, I mention this all the time, but I probably still don't need that stat in here, because since we have steal stats from every other position. 64 is fold versus steal. I use that stat a lot. 28.6 is 3-bet versus steal. 91 is fold to 3-bet. The fold to 3-bet is a really nice stat if you have a lot of hands. I mean, this is a stat where you need a huge sample to make it worthwhile. But it looks like we have, if you look down at the bottom there, fold to 3-bet. It's over 11 hands, so he's folding 9-10 times out of 11 when he gets 3-bet. So still some relevant information. 0 is c-bet percentage, and 83 is fold to c-bet. So some of these require some more stats, and they're not 100% accurate right now. But what we do know is we don't need a ton of stats to just know 56% button raise first over 18 hands is enough information to know he's raising really wide. 91 fold to 3-bet. Good information that he's raising a lot but also folding to 3-bet. So I really like the 3-bet here. So, and then the question is, what would you 3-bet? Do you always have to have an ace? Having an ace as a blocker is perfectly fine. I usually want to 3-bet random players. My 3-betting range is usually more of a value range, because yes, they might be opening wide, but they also might be calling wide. So just in case I don't know them a ton, I don't have a ton of notes, obviously if they're randoms, I usually want to 3-bet a range that I'm happy to get called with. If you have a guy, though, that's even wider, here we have 183 hands, not a ton, but enough to start getting some samples. In this case, I'd probably be 3-betting broadways, aces, any pocket pair, maybe some like 9-10 suited type hands. Even if you get called, your hand can play pretty well. If you really had somebody that was opening 56% of hands and folding 91% versus a 3-bet, technically you can 3-bet any two cards. But I wouldn't go that far yet without really hard evidence that this guy is folding that much. Queen 5 here. The question is, do we want to raise? Do we want to do a limp steal? Like, again, I've talked about in some previous videos. This guy's a random, so this is where I look at fold versus steal. We don't have a lot of information. 50%. You know, he called or it looks like he called 1 out of 2 times. It has a 3-bet. We don't have a ton of information here. Versus a random, he's got a pretty big stack. I probably wouldn't raise here if he had an 80%. If we had a half decent sample and he had an 80% or 70% fold versus steal, I would go ahead and raise. Versus a random, I would usually try to do a limp stab versus a loose passive. He doesn't actually look that loose and passive playing 24-17. If he was playing like 24-2, then I would probably do a limp steal. So I don't think folding here is bad. I usually like to see right away, since this guy's going to be up to our left, at least for now, unless we have to change tables. I usually like to see what I can get away with, how that player is going to act, because I don't always want to be folding to them if I don't pick up a great hand in the blind. So probably what I'd start out with is, especially with a bad hand, probably a limp steal. See how it goes. If he raises over top of your limp, okay, yeah, maybe we'll mix it up for the next time. But I just hate giving people blinds. I always think there's a way to steal them, exploiting them. The guys who are the biggest pains to play in the blinds are the loose players, but also potentially aggressive players, because if you limp, they raise over top of your limp. If you raise, they're either going to call or 3-bet, so that's when you have to tighten up typically. Good open. Obviously, we're going to be folding there. Now, you get a reg who 3-bet jams on you, so it's always good to take note of what guys are jamming on you. He's got pocket sevens, so well within the range. What this guy was doing with ace-3 here is beyond me, but hey, that's what you get with these random players. Alright. So, here's a hand I wanted to discuss. Ace-5 offsuit. This looks like an instant fold, which I think most people would probably do. However, I think identifying these spots a few times a game can really help build up monster stacks when done correctly. When you're in the post-ante stage, guys, pots are extremely valuable, especially when you're at full tables. As soon as typically when you're at big blind 250, big blind 300, you're still typically going to be dealing with full tables or 8-handed, 7-handed. So again, the pots are extremely valuable. So your VPIP and preflop raise should be going up dramatically at this point. It's going to be it's typically very plus EV to open and to steal that pot. Certainly within reason, of course, depending on the players and stack sizes to your left. Again, I reference video 2 of the Singo series that I did in talking about why this is so profitable. So go back to that if you haven't seen it yet, or if you don't remember some of those calculations, or how to evaluate good times to open and not good times to open. So in this hand, let's take a look at what we have. We still have this random guy, right? He's not too out of control in these stats, but he's still random. He can do random stuff, maybe flat, who knows. You get this Flow 005 guy playing 14-12. Marty's a little bit more loose and aggressive, but reg nonetheless. 10-9, 11-9, and then a looser random player in the big blind. So of the 6 people we have to our left, 2 are potentially capable of flatting. Certainly the guy in the blind, and maybe this guy directed to your left. To be honest, I don't care about this guy in the big blind, because if he does call, I mentioned it before, we have position. Having position is fine, especially with ace high, so no big deal there. With the other guys, they are regs or have regish stats. Therefore, this is key, they're more likely to 3-bet rather than call your raise. So they're going to be they're either going to 3-bet or fold, and you're not going to have to play post flop versus them. So whenever you're in that situation, when they're you look to your left, there's regs, they're either 3-betting or folding, you can open very, very wide. So what I did was I pulled out the old Card Runners EV program, and I did a calculation, and this looks like a mess. It was a pretty big decision tree that I did, and without going through this a ton, I simplified the decisions here. Like I said, this guy is capable of flatting. I didn't include flatting in this scenario just because it's a little bit more subjective. I think it's more of a pain. To be honest, I don't think it's 100% necessary. Um, if the guy flats, okay, we'll deal with that, and quite simply, we can win with a c-bet. So I don't think it's the worst situation in the world either. If the big blind flats, again, I don't mind that. I think that's a good situation. That can only improve our EV in this play. But the question is, like, let's say, maybe you have all tight players, or they only are going to be 3-betting or folding. Is opening from here with a hand like Ace-5 going to be plus EV, given the stack sizes, which are good? We can raise fold to everybody. If you had a bunch of stacks that were sitting here at 2K, they're more likely to 3-bet because they're getting shorter. That's a situation I probably wouldn't open, but given everybody has 10 big blinds or more, you can raise fold. You're not committed to anybody. So the question is opening here going to be plus chip EV? And let's take a look. So what I did was here, if we raised to 600, I gave everybody a pretty standard 3-betting range. Roughly, let's see, down to 8s and Ace-Queen for the earlier position guys, a little bit wider for the other guys. So let's just take a look, and this simulation hopefully won't take too long, given it's a pretty big tree that I put together here. You can see here that by raise folding with Ace-5 offsuit, raise folding to everybody, it's going to produce 265 chips. So close to every time you open here, you are going to pick up close to 1 big blind. Okay, so these are spots that I like to quite simply add in and identify opportunities to make these plays. Because think about it, how frequently do these situations pop up where a hand is folded to you and you have the decision whether to open or fold? So because these happen so frequently, if you can pick up a couple extra spots a game, you can add tons and tons of chips to your stack over the course of an entire game, and which means quite simply by the end of the game you're going to be adding a lot of EV, a lot of plus EV spots, which is what adds up to increasing your ROI. So these are the spots that I like to identify for regs who are already winning regs, but that are probably not opening in these spots. So if you can identify a handful of spots open that you weren't opening before, and that you now realize are plus EV, you can build bigger stacks over the course of the game, and hopefully finish in first place a whole lot more. So let's move forward. So I decided to fold Queen Jack here. You get a guy who's really tight opening up. You have right at like 10 big blinds. You probably have not a ton of fold equity, so not a great spot to get it in here. Easy call here with Ace-10 suited versus a button shove from a reg. Certainly get a little lucky. This guy with Ace-Queen makes a nice little overcall, but we suck out, so that's never a problem. Alright. Yeah, there wasn't, I think everything was pretty standard here, just a lot of folds. Open with Queen 10. Now the question is, could he have called this shove? Actually, there's 800 left behind, so he's not exactly getting 2-1. A little bit less than 2-1 from another reg. DJ is a reg. I think this is actually a good race fold. He didn't get sucked in by looking at the pot odds. What is this reg going to be 3-betting with versus another reg's under the gun open when he has less than 10 big blinds? It's most likely a range that crushes Queen 10 offsuit. So I like the raise fold there. No reason to call off half of your stack there when you're most likely crushed. And again, if you were just looking at his pot odds, it said 2-1, but he had 800 chips left behind. So you're getting a little bit less pot odds technically. Okay, so we get Marty here to open. He opens at 1200. He has a half decent stack. Our hero here has a half decent stack. He 3-bets with ace 10, he gets a fold, and it works out. However, I am not in love with this 3-bet jam. I did do some calculations with this. Instead of going through the calculations, I'll talk about it in general. This 3-bet here is pretty marginal. Marty is a more aggressive reg with his opening range, but according to the the stats I have, if we're going to go off of this, he's opening roughly 16-17% from early position here. So he would need to be calling with a range of only roughly 4%, like pocket tens, ace queen suited. I could see him certainly calling with worse pocket pairs here, by the way, guys. So to make this play worthwhile, he needs to be either, if he's opening any tighter or calling any wider, then this marginal play becomes very negative EV, which you simply don't want to do with this type of stack size, because we have a half decent stack size to work with. No reason to put yourself in an unnecessary situation where you're risking your entire stack. There's nothing that can end the game quicker than 3-betting too light in a situation that you might be guessing in. So if you don't know exactly, and our hero here, he might know exactly what this guy's opening, and that's fine. But if you're dealing with somewhat of an unknown range, which usually you are, you don't have 100% information on everybody. You want to be careful and essentially give yourself a cushion, because since you have 16 big blinds, if you're going to risk your entire stack, I would want to make sure I pick up enough chips in the long run for whenever my 3-bet is successful. So if you're looking at like sit and go wizard and you put this hand in there, and you're looking at the edge and determining what's a big enough edge, usually in this spot I would want to pick up at least one big blind on average, having this size stack. If it's close to 0 or maybe just like 100 chips, well, that could easily become a negative play, just messing around with these ranges by a hand or two, either tightening up or calling it a little bit wider. So you don't really want to put yourself in that position. The ace jack might be a little bit better, ace jack suited, but ace 10 I think again is really marginal and borderline or even potentially negative EV depending on the exact range of Marty. So it's great that the hand works out, but again, 3-betting too light, especially versus under the gun or early position raises, is something to be careful with. 7-6 suited. This could have easily just been a misclick here, or just maybe playing too many tables, because this is a standard open. Having a suited connector on the button, it's pretty standard open, regardless of who's in the blinds. So definitely like an open there. And it looks like all this is just folding away. Alright, so we get our guy who's really loose that we mentioned before, this KSD Real guy. We get, reg, but it doesn't matter. He's got, 2 big blinds. He ships it in. So the pot's pretty big right now. We got about a 6,200 chip pot, which is 60% of our stack, versus a guy who we know it can be opening really wide, but also folding. And we've got some relatively tight players here, it seems, in the blinds. So I love the squeeze here. We get into an isolated pot versus the short stack, which we could quite simply be doing pretty well against. If we get called by Casey, obviously it's not great, but given the size of the pot odds, you're going to have enough equity here to justify this. So I love the squeeze here. You could do this with a lot of broadways. Ace X gets a little bit, like Ace Deuce. I probably wouldn't do it with, because with a lot of hands that he would call with pocket pairs and other aces, you're crushed. At least Queen Jack broadways like this are going to perform well. So Ace 8, maybe Ace 8 off, something like that would be okay to squeeze here. Nice. So it works out nicely, and we go from having a 10 big blind stack to a 16 big blind stack. So that was a really nice situation there. All right. Tens. All right. So here, and this is something I've been working with this reg on doing, and if you remember from the previous hand histories that I've done for this player, the tricky hand ones, this was something that he's doing a lot of, which is jamming deeper, which is certainly plus EV, but like I mentioned in those previous videos and doing the reviews, raising and either raise calling or raise folding is just going to be more plus EV in the long run. In this case, you have the small blind playing 10-6 and the big blind playing 14-12. They're not massive samples, so their 3-betting stats are a little bit insignificant here. It's just 0%. I doubt it's obviously 0%. With a hand like King Jack suited, you could be raise calling if their 3-betting ranges are roughly 12% or more. However, so you could shove King Jack suited, that's going to be fine. You could raise call with it, that's going to be fine as well. But what raising does for you in general, kind of regardless of this hand, is allow you to raise with other hands as well, potentially any two cards, profitably. So instead of feeling like you always need to be shoving here, you can raise with 7 deuce off and fold to a 3-bet, or raise with hands like King Jack suited and call a shove. So yes, this is very exploitable, but as I say, guys, that's not the point. The question is, are they capable of exploiting you? Most regs are not, and until I have a specific note that a player is capable of exploiting, I'm going to be playing very exploitable to maximize my edge and profitability on most plays. So, is King Jack suited here? I kind of want to forget that we have King Jack suited. Shoving's going to be fine. Raise calling's going to be fine. If they're ultra nits, even raise folding if you think their 3-betting range isn't too wide here. But it's important to raise here because I want to raise here with aces, ace king, 7 deuce, 9-4, all those hands as well. Any two cards I want to be opening up with through these players. And raising with your good hands and bad hands will give you more confidence to do that. Not just feeling that you're in a polarized situation where you're just shoving your good hands, min-raising your aces and kings, and maybe either folding or min-raising your hands that you're stealing with. That becomes very polarized, and is what a lot of guys do, and I just think you're losing out on a lot of value doing that. Alright, so if I remember, I did go through this hand ahead of time. There wasn't a ton of trouble spots that come up. Next spots come up actually later in the game. We'll still flip through here so you can see essentially what this player's doing. What hands he's shoving. Because we're pretty much in push fold mode now. So bear with me as we flip through here. Oops, I'll go backwards. So he makes a good shove here with Jack 7 suited. Gets called, has a nice flop, but definitely within the shoving range there. And again, when you're in this situation, guys, you're getting pretty short. Blinds are coming around. You have to say to yourself, next time it's folded to me, we really look to need to look to shove the next hand that's folded to us because we don't know how many more times we'll get that opportunity. And if the blinds come back around, the worst thing you can do in your game is potentially get blinded out. So, even if it's slightly negative EV situation, it's okay if you can pick up chips to give yourself a more to put yourself in a more plus EV situation in the future. But suited, Jack 7 suited there is perfectly fine. I'd be shoving like Jack 8, Jack 9 off. That would be pretty much at the bottom, or pretty much Jack 9, Jack 10 off. Queens, hopefully just shoves. Good. Now, guys, this is obviously an easy shove. One thing, and he doesn't do it here, but I want to make sure, I've kind of seen it a lot recently. You're going to be shoving all of your hand. Any hand that you're going to play that's, a plus EV shove, looking at your chart or whatever, any hand you're going to play is pretty much going to be a shove. Assuming you have ace 10, you're going to shove it. Do the same thing with your premium hands. I mean, unless you have like a really fishy table that you can maybe get to flat or induce when you have a premium hand. I don't like when guys min raise with like 7 or 8 big blinds. I think it's so transparent. If you're going to do it with other hands as well, okay. But I would want to shove here with aces and kings as well, so that it looks like I'm shoving every other hand that I would play as well. So worse aces, broadways. That's especially if you're at a reg-filled table where they understand ranges. So, and that's nice. So we're picking up half decent stacks here. Doesn't hurt when you pick up hands and win. Okay, so let's take a look back. So I want to take a look at stacks. Okay, so we've got a guy here with 5 big blinds. We've got a pretty half decent stack here. I think he has 5 big blinds, right? Yeah, 5 big blinds. So we could be shoving ultra wide. Our hero here decides to ISO raise with ace high. Ace deuce is never that great. Even if we lose this hand, though, it's going to be okay. So his ISO raise here, I'm not sure, maybe you guys are doing this, maybe you guys aren't. The first thing you need to do is, what's the range this guy's shoving with? Especially if it's a reg who understands their shoving ranges. When you have 5 big blinds here, especially in these games, you need to shove really, really wide. So it can be a lot of connecting hands. Obviously, any king. A ton of hands that aces that just simply have an ace high is doing well against. And I like this spot to ISO because of his stack. If he loses, he still has a very comfortable stack. It would knock him down to, around the 60k mark. But if he wins, that puts him well into the chip lead. Or not into the chip lead. We still got this guy to our left, sorry, or to our right, sorry. But giving yourself a really big stack that will allow you to finish deeper, and that's the name of the game in these 180s. You want to get to the top 3 spots, and if you can pick up spots like this where if you lose it doesn't hurt you too much, but if you win it gives you a really nice edge, then I'll go ahead and take that spot even if it's slightly marginal. So I like this ISO here a lot. I would do this with a lot of broadways, obviously pocket pairs, aces. So you can see he's got a nice stack now, and we are looks like we're on the final table bubble given the stack sizes. So you can treat the final table bubble, just as I said, as a bubble, and guys really want to make that final table. There's a pay jump there, obviously, so you can start abusing if you have the chip lead over these mid stacks to your left, and that's what our hero here is going to be doing. So you'll see in a second. I pretty much I love what he starts doing. And if you're not doing this, then you should start. Ace Jack. Okay, this might have been a misclick. We get a guy who limps here. You just jam over top of that limp. And this guy's ace jack as well. So it was kind of weird hand played all around, but this is a very standard time to. If we just go backwards, you get a guy who limps as a random. You have ace jack, just ship it over top. So hopefully that was just a misclick. But here you go. So we've got a lot of mid stacks. Yes, they're less than 10 big blinds, but they still have a manageable stack and a stack that they don't easily just want to call off. So we can start abusing, which I really like, and it's also nice when you run well as well. Um, but take advantage of those times where you're the chip leader, final table bubble. You got guys to your left who might just be scrambling to try to make the money. Go ahead and start abusing. You know they're going to be calling tight. No problem with this. Obviously, with kings, he decided to flat. Again, if you don't have a reggy table, or if your table is pretty loose, and you can do this to entice some potential squeezes. Keep a lot of hands in that might otherwise fold to a 3-bet. So he decides to get a little tricky here, and it certainly works out. So, again, that's something that, if you guys are just instant 3-betting every time you have kings and aces, there's certainly no problem with that. But maybe call or just flatting and inducing somebody else to squeeze or keeping worse hands in can be a more profitable play. Here we get a short stack shove. We have a pretty good hand here. Doesn't cost much to call. We're getting over 2-to-1 odds. 32% equity is all we need to justify a call, really. So running good, playing good as well. Always a good combination. And this is where he just goes into shove mode, which is, again, is perfectly fine. Maximize your fold equity, put the pressure on guys. Especially this guy. What has he got? 15,000. I'm sorry, he doesn't have. I thought he had 159,000. Yeah, but go ahead and just start shipping it in there. Ace king, pretty easy. Continuing to run well. So he folds 5-6. He's the chip leader here. Let me go back. So he's a chip leader versus some other half decent stacks, but they're relatively equal. This is when I think you want to be putting a lot of pressure on them. And again, this guy, we're not changing tables anymore. This guy's going to be to your left the entire time. So I want to see now, how's this guy going to play when he's on my left? Is he going to be calling a lot of raises? Is he going to be letting me get away with raising? So I want to find that out early so that I'll know how to adjust moving forward. So I would be fine with just raising here. Let's see if that works. If he's going to respect you as the chip leader, then use that to your advantage for the future. And start raising more. If he's going to be flatting you a lot and 3-betting a lot, maybe you can mix in some limps and do like a limp stab. Limp, hopefully check, stab at any pot. And then if he's going to get really wild and crazy against that play, well, then we can resort to probably folding some bad hands, raising the good ones. But I want to know right away how players are going to be reacting. So there you go. He raises with king 3. Okay. Gets 3-bet, has to give it up. No problem. So whenever this happens, like, you've been folding a lot. This guy, Mata AK, he's a reg. We obviously know this guy is not a reg, but we've been folding a lot, so I would just go ahead and put in a raise here. And look to start stealing. So he decides to, this is the time he decided to open up. Can't fault him for it. We talked about this guy before. He's opening really wide, folds a lot versus a 3-bet, it seems. So he decides to get a little tricky, and 3-bet here is a bluff. That's fine, since we know this guy's capable of folding a lot. Versus randoms, I'm usually a little bit more cautious than that, because they also are capable of flatting and not just folding. So if you're against a guy that's opening and can flat versus a 3-bet, then I probably wouldn't be bluffing those hands. Good, so you would just want to keep up the aggression. Good, 3-bet jam versus a reg there. Good, keep up the pressure. And a good thing to note, guys, here is this reg here is not messing around with our hero, who is the chip leader. So if he does start opening, then we can actually give him credit for a hand, because as of right now, he is just folding away. And this guy isn't screwing around now. So he has 3-bet like 3 or 4 times now every time we raise. So I'd probably want to start mixing up. Certainly if you get a good hand, you want to open and hopefully induce him. But otherwise, maybe doing some limp steals. So good. You know, this 3. Another thing, guys, against a reg, they're not going to raise and then call a 3-bet typically, especially in this position where he's out of position. So you can do a 3-bet as a bluff, really small. You don't need to go big, and accomplish the same thing. So that's a really nice play here. What I'd say is, versus another reg, maybe keep it similar. Like if you had ace king here, would you do the same thing? Would you just min 3-bet? So if you're going to do the same thing with deuce 3, do the same thing here. Min 3-bet against him, because he might get frustrated now. He might think it's just a bluff, but obviously there is no bluff when you, or maybe there is a bluff, but he realized he can't 4-bet shove. You know, we want to add in that extra play, get him thinking, potentially make a mistake. So one thing is, don't fall into the trap, guys. If you're going to 3-bet small as a bluff, but 3-bet shove with a made hand, that can become very transparent if you are doing that. So just keep it the same, because I think definitely should open 6-5 suited here. So definitely keep it the same. People will have no idea what hands you're playing with. With this guy getting closer to 10 big blinds, I would actually probably resort more to shoving now. I don't really want to induce any potential 3-bets from this guy who's really loose. So I'd probably just look to maximize my fold equity with these half-decent hands and ship it in. Just like he did there, which is perfectly fine now. Yeah, I'd probably just shove it here. He's only got 13, 14 big blinds. Since they're equal stacks, this is like a great time to just abuse as much as possible. So if this guy was a tighter reg, sure, I agree with just raising. But this guy has been 3-betting nonstop. I would just go ahead and ship it all in. Could have shipped that in if he won it. I agree with the fold there. Yeah, so I think this is the error here is probably not adjusting fast enough. This guy's 3-betting non-stop. This is 3-8. Ba-ba-bum. And there we go. Nice turn card, the old one outer. So this was certainly a game where we ran pretty hot, and we get heads up here, and there we are. So finished it off nicely. So General thoughts three-handed, just to kind of recap those last group of hands. Um, when you've been in the small blind, the big blind is playing very aggressive, even with you as the chip leader. And we had that guy playing like 30-29 with 30 like a 30% three bet versus steal. You should probably just be shoving into that player more, even when it's around 12 to 13 big blinds effective. If there's a few spots, where you had the raise fold, I thought that maybe got a little bit tentative, maybe not opening like that. There was an 8-9 suited, a 6-7 suited hand on the button. That you could have actually just jammed in as well for 12, 13 big blinds effective to abuse. And as I said, I think you can mix in a bit. When you're a bit deeper, that instead of raising, you could try to limp stab, where you limp in the small blind. Hopefully, the big blind checks. You bet half the pot on any flop. It typically works better against loose passive players since they're less likely to raise over your limp. But they're also going to call a raise, forcing you to play out of position. And in this game, the big blind was very aggressive, so limping may not have been best. But if you want to mix it up instead of just raising or folding, limping in and betting the flop can be an option. And if you do get raised, you can also use that to your advantage as well, guys. If you pick up a premium hand later on where you can limp and force a wide shove. So certainly congrats to our hero here on the first place finish. Obviously, he is crushing the games. So like I said, when I'm doing his reviews of players that already have a positive ROI, I want to try and recommend plays to add into your game where you can increase your ROI. So maybe it's looking for those any two card steal spots, mixing up your play a little bit more. And you do that, you could see your ROI go from 18, 20% to maybe 22, 23%. So if you're a full-time player, adding just 1 or 2% to your ROI can be massive in terms of your income on a monthly basis. So I think the big suggestion I have from this game is play more of like a race fold, race call type of game. But overall, pretty good game. Hopefully you guys like this review, and we'll see you in the next video.